We've got a lot to do today, so let's get to it. To start with, we will make some steel fences, and then with them, alongside some other components, we will make the crusher. This is the projector blueprint for it, so we will find it a home somewhere around here, and then we will just start constructing it. That's all of the blocks now in place, so let's get it turned into the crusher. And now just to power it. We will be using some medium voltage for this, but hopefully after we've done this, then we can move on to high voltage. The crusher is now powered on, so let's start throwing some iron ingots into it, and that will slowly start crushing them down into some iron dust for us. We will then need to grab out some cactus blocks, and then start melting those down into some nice cactus paste for us, and then we just simply turn the cactus paste into green dye, and that should then be everything that we will require to make some insulating glass, which then means that we can make some heavy voltage wire relays. We will also require an HV transformer, which requires some wire connectors, iron ingots, and a high voltage coil block, with the high voltage coil block just being HV wire coil alongside an iron ingot, and HV wire coil being aluminium wire alongside steel wire to make. So now for the very tedious part of removing all of the MV components and replacing them with HV components. And that is about 100 of those thermoelectric generators now all connected up using high voltage cables. And this setup, I believe, will give us out about 3000 RF per tick, which should certainly be more than enough for what we're needing today. But because the power has been disconnected, then above us is rather dark at the moment, so we will definitely need to address that. Which is where these transformers then come into play, as this will take the high voltage wires, connect it onto the transformer to step it down to medium voltage, then from medium to step it down into low voltage. And if I connect this wire there to this one here, things should lag a little bit, and that is because things have worked there and the lights have come back on, so all of the nasties will now need to be sorted, unless they are just quite happy sitting on top of all of the machines here. And job sorted. The next item that we need to create is a core sample drill, and this can be created pretty simply using steel scaffolding, steel fences, and light engineering blocks. And basically with this item, if we place it down onto some stone and supply it with power, it will give us a readout as to whether there is oil underneath it or not. So of course we will need a fairly big area to place this down onto to see if we have any oil within it, which at least we do have some room now. And I believe that this will work on a chunk basis, so we will need to test several chunks around here to see if there is any oil underneath it or not. Well, let's start getting some power into this setup then, which we will do by filling up a heavy voltage capacitor and then setting it beside our core sample drill, giving it power, which should then allow it to drill down and give us a reading output. And we have struck lucky here with a crude oil reservoir just underneath us, so perfect. Now just to get that oil out of the ground, which will require a pump jack. And it's a fairly simple recipe for this. We now have machines making us up all of those components there. Maybe apart from the block of steel, which is just simply a steel block turned into it using a stone cutter. And that's all easy enough, so there are a few blocks of steel for us. We've removed the core sample machine, and in its place we will set down the projection for the pump jack. And now just the simple part of getting it all set up. And that's looking pretty good. Let's get it turned into the pump jack then. Perfect. And we are going to be making quite a lot of these petrochemical machines here today. So that's why it was a good job for us to upgrade the power here. And that should pretty much instantly be filled. Although in order for it to operate, we will need to attach it to a tank here to store all of the fluid from it. So we will just set that there, and it's a fairly easy recipe to make this, if I had more parts. And that's everything that we require for it, so let's turn it into the tank, and now we need to connect it up with some pipes. Which, after we connect that last pipe up, the pump jack should start operating. Good. And the fluid tank here should start filling up with some crude oil for us. And now then, to move on to the distillation tower, which is a simple building in terms of the components it requires, but a ridiculously complex building in terms of its footprint here. This build is 4 blocks long by 16 blocks tall by 4 blocks wide. And seeing as this room is only 10 blocks tall, I've got a bit of digging to do again. Well, I ended up making the wall considerably taller than what we needed for the distillation tower. But I did see in advance that the coker build that we will need to make is actually 5 by 23 tall by 9. So this just saves a little bit of digging out later on, I suppose. Anyway, we now have the space, so let's get a distillation tower then sorted for us. And we'll set the blueprint for it just in the corner here. Right, let's get to building then. Well, so far we are 4 blocks tall with this, and I think the whole pattern of this build is very similar just after we create this floor. So we are going to end up with something similar to that, except obviously a lot further up. And that's the green tick now all the way around it, suggesting that I have done it right. The only issue is, how do we get down? I think we can use the scaffolding here as some ladders. Okay. Good enough. Right, let's get this bad boy turned into the distillation tower then. So we will need to feed some crude oil into this through this vent here, which means we will need another line of our fluid pipes all the way over to the main tank now. And that's a line of pipes then leading over to the distillation tower, although I think we will need to provide the fluid tank here with a redstone source, such as a lever, to start the fluid actually moving. And something is clearly happening because we are starting to get out some gasoline, some sulfurized diesel, and some lubricant. But the main item that we are waiting on this machine creating for us is that right there actually, some bitumen. And it's with the bitumen that we can then put that into a coker to eventually turn it into some petcoke for us. But because the distillation tower here is already pretty full of liquids at the moment, we will need to deal with those first, which we will do through the use of some more fluid tanks alongside a fluid router. And all of the parts to make the router are fairly simple, so there is a fluid router then for us. And if we quickly come over and grab out a few more fluid pipes, we can then set down the fluid router just in front of the fluid tanks here, and then start connecting them up to the output of the distillation tower. Although we will need to tell the router to send which liquid where first, so this is the green side, and I think we will send gasoline over to it. This is the red side, so we will send the sulfurized diesel over to it. And this is the yellow side, which we will send the lubricant over to it. So that's all connected there, and we're getting the diesel in the middle, gasoline down the bottom, and lubricant at the end here. Perfect. So that will allow us to still use the crude oil within it and get rid of all of the liquids within it, but mainly to then allow it to start processing us some more bitumen. Now on to the part that I'm not looking forward to, creating the coker, which will use a lot of components that we already know how to make, but maybe some that we don't yet, although the steel structural arms are fairly simple to make. But the concrete and concrete tiles here, these are a new beast that we will need to look into, which actually have a fairly simple recipe to make them using gravel, water, clay and slag. So finally a use for all of this slag that we have been collecting, and that is then everything that we require to make some concrete. And it's then with the concrete that we can then make the concrete tiles. Well, that's all of the parts now for it, so let's look into making this monster, which we will just set that about there. I think that's enough room around it. Alright then, let's get to building. Well, we are nearly at the same height now as the distillation tower. And what I can tell you is, there's still a bit more to go, and I am really not enjoying this. This is very tedious. Although in saying that, these last few parts here seem to be fairly simple to make. Just a lot of scaffolding and pipes that go into it. And actually, we're done. About bloody time. So this is the mess that we have just created, which, let me tell you, certainly took a moment, but let's now hammer this into the actual coker form. And just before we get it powered on, I know that the Petcoke will be dropped from those little funnels there, which means we need to come into this and start placing down some conveyor belts to take it out. Otherwise, we will end up crawling about in here for the rest of our days. Unlike most of the other machines, which only have one power input, the coker here actually has 3 power inputs, and that is the coker now powered. And in order for it to turn the bitumen into our Petcoke, we will also need to supply it with some water. So we will start filling it up with some water. And then we can input our bitumen, which will go inside of it and will very slowly start processing into Petcoke. And while we wait on that happening, we will see if we have collected any more bitumen, which we certainly have. So we will get both of the silos full of bitumen then, and ultimately that just means faster processing of Petcoke for us. Which, speak of the devil, here they come. So there is an entire stack of Petcoke for us. Well, that is half of the puzzle now solved with us getting Petcoke. The next half will involve us making a block of Petcoke, and in order to make it, we will require an arc furnace, which will require a few different things just before it. So we will start off by making a squeezer, which is a fairly simple recipe, just with the addition of wooden barrels, and they are very easy to then make, so there's a few wooden barrels for us. We will set the squeezer very close by to the crusher, then begin the construction of it. Looking good. Now let's get this into proper shape and then get some power into it. If I now come over to our coke ovens and take out some coal coke I've been storing, I can then start throwing that into the crusher and then take out the resulting coke dust from it, which I can then insert into the squeezer, and that will start to process it into some HOP graphite dust. And if I put the HOP graphite dust into a furnace, we will then get out some HOP graphite ingots, which I can then use a metal press with a rod mold to then turn those ingots into some electrodes for us. some graphite electrodes for us. And it's with them that we can now make the arc furnace, which has a fairly standard recipe for it, although it will require some reinforced blast bricks, which will then require some more chromatic compounds. That is us now once again with everything that we require. Now just to find the arc furnace a home, which we will just simply sit right here, and you know the drill by now. Yup, a bit tight, but that's it. So let's get it into its proper form, the hottest topic. And with the electrodes, we will simply put them into the top of the furnace there. So there they are in all of their magnificent glory. Now just to get this bad boy powered on. And that is the arc furnace now set up and operational. In order for us to make the block of Petcoke, we will require the arc furnace to melt down Petcoke alongside a compressed block of coal ×2, which is basically just some blocks of coal compacted even further. So we'll stick that into the arc furnace alongside the Petcoke and just let the magic happen. And there, finally, is our block of Petcoke. And with it, that then opens up the possibility for us to make a machine frame, which will then wrap up the immersive engineering part of this and move us on to the thermal series part of it, because with these machine frames we then get access to a lot of new shiny toys to play with, and that will just need to wait until next time.